Emma had always believed in love. She wasn't the kind of woman who married for convenience or social status. She married for deep, genuine affection. When she met Daniel 5 years ago, she was convinced she had found the one. He was charming, attentive, and always knew exactly what to say. He made her feel seen, understood, and most importantly loved. Their relationship had moved quickly, but it felt right. Within a year, they were married, and Emma had never once doubted her decision. At 34, she had built an impressive life for herself. Coming from humble beginnings, she had worked tirelessly to grow her business from the ground up. It hadn't been easy. Long hours, sleepless nights, and countless sacrifices had gone into making her company one of the most successful in her industry. But she had done it, and she had done it without relying on anyone. She took pride in that. Daniel had entered her life when she was at the peak of her success. He was different from the men she had dated before. Easygoing, charismatic, and seemingly uninterested in her wealth. He had his own job, working as a consultant, though he never talked much about it. When they were together, he made her feel like none of it mattered. He loved her for who she was, not for what she had. Or at least, that's what she had believed. It was a quiet evening when everything changed. Emma had come home earlier than usual, exhausted from a long day. She had intended to pour herself a glass of wine, take a hot bath, and unwind before Daniel returned from his supposed work meeting. But as she stepped inside, she heard his voice. He was on the phone laughing, speaking in a tone she didn't recognize. Relaxed, cocky, like a man who had nothing to lose. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. In fact, she had nearly called out to let him know she was home. But something in his voice made her pause. She stayed just outside the living room, hidden by the shadows of the hallway. Of course I married her for the money, Daniel said, still chuckling. Come on man, you think I'd be living in a house like this otherwise? Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. She's great, don't get me wrong. Smart, successful. But love? Be real. Love doesn't pay the bills. He paused, as if listening to the person on the other end. Nah, she has no idea. Emma actually thinks I adore her. Another laugh. It's not like I hate her or anything. She's not bad to be around. But if she lost everything tomorrow? Yeah, I'd be out. Emma's body went cold. She wanted to step forward, to scream, to demand an explanation. But she couldn't move. She stood frozen, listening to her husband talk about her like she was nothing more than an investment. Something he had acquired for convenience. Yeah, I'm playing the long game, Daniel continued, his voice filled with amusement. She's never going to leave me. Too loyal. Too in love. And I'm not stupid. I know how to keep her happy enough, so she won't start questioning anything. Another pause. Listen, as long as she's paying for the vacations, the nice cars, the perfect life, why would I walk away? I'd be an idiot. Emma couldn't take it anymore. She turned and walked upstairs, her mind spinning. She locked herself in their bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the floor, feeling numb. Her marriage had been a lie. Everything she had believed about Daniel, about their love, had been an illusion. He didn't love her. He had never loved her. He had used her. The realization hit her like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. For the first few minutes, she told herself it had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe she had misheard him. Maybe it was some kind of joke. But deep down she knew the truth. His words had been too clear, too casual. That wasn't the voice of a man pretending. That was the voice of a man who believed every word he was saying. Anger came next. It burned through the numbness, setting fire to the pieces of her heart that had shattered. She had given him everything. Her trust, her loyalty, her love. And he had thrown it all away for financial security. Emma had always considered herself a rational person. She didn't make decisions based on emotion. She weighed the facts, analyzed every angle. And as much as she wanted to march downstairs and confront him, to scream and demand answers, she forced herself to wait. She needed to think. Divorce. That was the logical answer. She had no reason to stay married to a man who saw her as nothing more than a bank account. But as she sat there, her fists clenched, a different thought took hold. Leaving him would be easy. Too easy. Daniel thought he had won. He believed he had secured a comfortable future for himself at her expense. He assumed she was too blinded by love to ever see him for what he truly was. But he was wrong. Emma wouldn't just walk away. No, she would make him watch as she took back her life. She would make him realize what he had lost. Not just the wealth, but the woman he had underestimated. And she would do it in a way he never saw coming. For the first time in hours, she felt a small, cold smile form on her lips. This wasn't over. Not yet. The morning after Emma overheard Daniel's betrayal, everything felt different. The house, once a place of warmth and love, now seemed foreign, like a stage where she had unknowingly played the role of the devoted wife, while her husband quietly mocked her behind her back. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying his words over and over in her mind. She actually thinks I adore her. The thought made her stomach turn. For the first time in years, Emma didn't kiss Daniel goodbye when he left for work. She didn't even get out of bed until she heard the front door close behind him. When she finally did, she moved on autopilot, making coffee, feeding the cat, checking her emails, trying to keep up the illusion of normalcy. But inside she was unraveling. She had spent the night cycling through emotions. Shock, heartbreak, rage. Now in the quiet of the morning, she felt something new. Clarity. Daniel had underestimated her. He saw her as a safe bet. Someone too in love to ever see the truth. He believed he had secured an easy, comfortable life at her expense. But Emma wasn't the naive, desperate woman he thought she was. She wouldn't beg for answers or demand an apology. She wouldn't even let him know she had overheard him. Instead, she would take control of her own narrative starting now. That afternoon, she went to lunch alone for the first time in a long time. It wasn't just any lunch. It was at one of the upscale restaurants she and Daniel often visited together. The kind of place where people whispered about who was dining with whom. She requested a table by the window, knowing it would be visible to anyone passing by. The waiter, recognizing her, hesitated. "Just you today, Misters Callahan?" Just her. It was strange how foreign that sounded. "Yes," she said with a smile. "Just me." The meal was delicious, but it wasn't about the food. It was about reminding herself who she was outside of Daniel. The kind of woman who could sit in a beautiful restaurant alone and not feel lonely. The kind of woman who didn't need anyone to complete her. She took her time enjoying her drink, observing the other diners. That was when she noticed him, Noah Sinclair. She recognized him from various industry events. A well-respected architect with a reputation for being both brilliant and humble. He was the kind of man who commanded attention without trying. They had spoken briefly at charity galas and networking events. Always in passing, always polite. Noah caught her gaze and smiled. A warm, genuine smile. "Emma," he said, approaching her table. "Mind if I join you?" For a brief moment she hesitated. Would Daniel hear about this? Would he even care? Then she reminded herself, it doesn't matter. "Of course," she said, gesturing to the seat across from her. The conversation flowed easily. Unlike Daniel, who always found a way to steer discussions back to himself, Noah was a listener. He asked about her work, her interests, her thoughts on the latest industry trends. And for the first time in a long time, Emma felt seen. She wasn't flirting. She wasn't doing anything wrong. But as she laughed at something Noah said, she knew Daniel would have hated this moment. Not because she was with another man, but because she was enjoying herself without him. By the time she left the restaurant, she felt lighter. That night, Daniel barely noticed her absence. He was distracted, scrolling through his phone while eating dinner. "Work stuff," he muttered when she asked. Emma simply nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't demand his attention. She just let him assume she was still the same devoted wife. But the next day she made sure he saw something different. Instead of her usual routine of working from home, Emma went to her company's office, something she hadn't done in months. She stayed late, attended meetings in person, and reconnected with colleagues she had unintentionally drifted from. She even posted a photo on social media. One of her and a few business partners at an exclusive event. Nothing dramatic, nothing overtly suspicious, but enough to remind people and Daniel that she was still a force to be reckoned with. The shift was subtle, but Daniel noticed. "You've been busy lately," he remarked one evening, as she slipped into bed later than usual. Emma smiled, brushing her hair back. "Just catching up on things. You know how it is." He nodded but said nothing more. For weeks, she continued her silent transformation. She prioritized herself, made plans without consulting him, surrounded herself with people who valued her, not her bank account. And the more she pulled away, the more Daniel began to notice. First he pretended not to care. But then the questions started. Who were you having dinner with? I saw you posted something. Who took that picture? You've been going out a lot lately. What's going on? Each time Emma simply smiled. Just keeping busy. She never argued, never accused, never confronted. She let him wonder. Let him feel the distance growing. Then one evening, she made sure he saw her with Noah. It wasn't planned, not exactly. But when she ran into him at an art exhibit, and he invited her for a drink afterward, she didn't say no. They sat at a quiet corner of the bar talking, laughing. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing she couldn't justify if Daniel asked. But she knew how it looked. And she knew Daniel saw, because when she returned home that night, his demeanor had changed. You've been spending a lot of time with that guy, he said casually, pretending not to care. Emma tilted her head. Who? You know who? She smiled, taking off her earrings. You never used to notice who I spent time with before. Why the sudden interest? Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. That was when Emma knew he felt it. The power shifting. The control slipping. And for the first time since that awful night, she felt something close to satisfaction. Daniel had made her feel replaceable. Now it was his turn to watch. The tension in the house was growing, and Emma could feel it in every interaction with Daniel. The easy confidence he once carried, the smug assurance that he had her wrapped around his finger, was starting to crack. He wasn't the type to confront things head-on, at least not when he wasn't in control of the situation. Instead, he watched, analyzed, and waited, trying to figure out if he needed to be concerned. Emma, of course, gave him nothing. She continued her life as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. She worked late, spent weekends out with friends, and always made sure to look effortlessly put together whenever she left the house. She knew Daniel noticed, even if he never said anything outright. His glances lingered longer. His questions became more frequent, though carefully phrased so they didn't sound accusatory. One evening, as Emma was getting ready to leave for a charity gala, Daniel stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching. You're going out again? She turned, adjusting an earring. I was invited to the Kensington Foundation event. It's for a good cause. Daniel frowned. You never used to care much for these things. That wasn't true, but she didn't correct him. Instead, she smiled. Maybe I just like being around people who appreciate me. The jab landed, though Daniel quickly masked his reaction. He cleared his throat and shoved his hands into his pockets. Who are you going with? Emma took her time answering. Noah will be there. Among others. She saw the flicker of irritation cross his face before he could hide it. That was new. Right, he said, forcing a casual tone. You two have been spending a lot of time together. Emma met his gaze in the mirror. Does that bother you? Daniel hesitated just for a second, but it was enough. No, he said, but it wasn't convincing. She let the silence stretch before turning to grab her clutch. Good. Then you won't mind if I come home late. She walked past him without waiting for a response, feeling his stare burn into her back. The gala was beautiful. Candlelit tables, champagne glasses clinking, the hum of polite conversation filling the space. Emma moved through the crowd with practiced ease, greeting familiar faces, engaging in conversations about philanthropy and business. And of course Noah was there. He was easy to be around, which was something she hadn't realized she had been missing. He never made her feel like she had to shrink herself, never treated her like an accessory. There was something refreshing about the way he spoke to her. Not as a wealthy woman, not as someone powerful, but as a person. At some point in the evening, as they stood near the balcony overlooking the city, he turned to her with a small smile. You seem different these days, he noted. Emma raised an eyebrow. Different how? I don't know, he said thoughtfully. Lighter. Stronger. Like you're finally choosing yourself. She considered that. Had she ever chosen herself? She had spent years making herself small in ways she hadn't even noticed. Keeping the peace, pretending not to see the cracks in her marriage, convincing herself that love meant sacrifice. But she wasn't sacrificing anymore. Emma glanced at her phone at one point in the night and saw a missed call from Daniel. She didn't call back. When she arrived home past midnight, Daniel was waiting in the living room, his face unreadable. Had fun? He asked, his tone carefully neutral. I did, she said, kicking off her heels. It was a beautiful event. His eyes flicked to her, studying her. Were you with him all night? Emma arched an eyebrow. Who? Daniel scoffed, shaking his head. You know who? She took a slow breath, walking over to the bar cart to pour herself a drink. I was with a lot of people. Important people. She took a sip. But yes, Noah was there. Something in Daniel's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing, just watching her. Then finally, he exhaled a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. This is revenge, isn't it? He said, shaking his head. You're trying to punish me. Emma tilted her head. Revenge for what? Daniel hesitated. He knew he was on dangerous ground. If he admitted what she suspected, that he knew exactly what she was doing, it would mean confessing that he had something to be guilty about. And Daniel never confessed to anything unless he had no other choice. Instead, he ran a hand through his hair. I just think it's interesting. You never used to go out this much. But suddenly you're never home. Suddenly you're always with him. Emma swirled the liquid in her glass. You never seemed to care where I was before. He didn't have an answer for that. For the first time since she had overheard that phone call, Emma saw something in Daniel's expression that almost looked like regret. But she knew better. It wasn't regret, it was fear. Fear that he was losing something he had always assumed he could keep. She finished her drink and set the glass down, meeting his gaze. Go to bed, Daniel. He didn't argue. He just stood there for a moment longer, staring at her as if he didn't quite recognize her anymore. And maybe he didn't, because Emma wasn't the woman he had married. Not anymore. The night Emma told Daniel to go to bed, she knew the end was near. She had seen it in his eyes, the realization, the panic. He had spent years believing she would always be there, always loyal, always willing to ignore the small cracks in their marriage. But now, the foundation had crumbled, and Daniel was beginning to grasp just how little control he had left. Over the next few days he changed. At first it was subtle, more effort in conversations, small gestures of affection he hadn't bothered with in years. He texted her more often, asking about her day, suggesting dinner dates, even offering to take time off work so they could reconnect. It was all so carefully orchestrated, so transparent in its intent, that Emma almost laughed. He wasn't fighting for her. He was fighting for the comfort and security she had always provided. She let him try. Let him squirm. Let him believe for a little while that he might be able to salvage the image of their marriage. Then one evening she shattered that illusion completely. They were having dinner at home. One of Daniel's attempts to spend more time together. He had gone out of his way to cook, something he rarely did, as if the effort alone could undo years of deception. The meal was fine, the conversation polite, but Emma could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept waiting for her to say something, anything, to confirm that she was still his. She let the silence stretch as she sipped her wine, watching him. Then finally, she set her glass down and said, I know, Daniel. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. Know what? Emma tilted her head, studying him. I know why you married me. His expression flickered, just for a second. But it was enough. He recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. What are you talking about? She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. I heard you. That night. On the phone. She let the words settle, watching as his entire body went rigid. I heard everything, Daniel. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. For the first time in their marriage, he had no prepared excuse, no well-crafted lie to hide behind. He just stared at her, his face pale. Emma, don't. Her voice was calm, steady. Don't insult me by pretending it didn't happen. He swallowed hard, setting his fork down carefully, as if buying himself time. I was drunk, he said finally. I was just talking shit. You know how guys joke around. She gave him a slow, knowing smile. So if I had lost everything tomorrow, you wouldn't have left? He hesitated. That was all the answer she needed. She exhaled softly and reached into the drawer by the table. Without ceremony, she placed a thick envelope in front of him. Daniel stared at it. What's this? Divorce papers. His head snapped up. Emma, I've already spoken to my lawyers. I'm offering you a clean break, One that won't ruin you financially, even though I could. She met his gaze unflinching. You sign them. And you walk away with enough to start over. No fighting. No mess. Just freedom. Daniel clenched his jaw. So that's it. You've been punishing me for weeks, parading around with Sinclair, just so you could throw this in my face? Emma let out a soft laugh. You really think this is about Noah? She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. This was never about revenge, Daniel. It was about letting you see what it feels like to be second choice. To watch someone you thought you controlled slip through your fingers. His breathing was uneven now. You're serious. As serious as I was the day I married you, she said quietly. The difference is back then I thought it was real. Daniel sat back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. He looked exhausted, defeated. And for the first time, Emma saw him for what he truly was, not a powerful, confident man, but someone who had always relied on others to hold him up. Finally, he exhaled and reached for the papers. She watched as he flipped through them, his hands tightening around the edges. When he reached the last page, he hesitated, then looked up at her. Do you love him? Emma blinked. What? Noah, he said, his voice bitter. Are you in love with him? She thought about it. Thought about the way Noah made her feel seen, valued, respected. Thought about how, in all their time together, he had never once made her feel small. Then she shook her head. No, she said simply. But I could be. Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. Then, without another word, he signed. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings and paperwork. There were no drawn-out fights, no desperate pleas to reconsider. Daniel knew better than to try. When it was finally done, when the last document was filed and she was officially free, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in years. Relief. She didn't throw a party. She didn't rush into Noah's arms. She simply went home, opened a bottle of wine and sat on the couch, allowing herself to breathe. Noah called that night. She answered, smiling as she heard his familiar voice. Hey, he said. How are you feeling? Emma looked around her home. Finally feeling like it belonged to her again. Lighter, she admitted. He chuckled. Good. You deserve that. They talked for a while, easy and unhurried. He didn't push, didn't ask what came next. He just let her exist in the moment. And for the first time in a long time, Emma wasn't someone's wife. She wasn't a role to be played. She was just Emma. And that was enough.